give a tremendous Sounders welcome to Henry Brauner.
Thank you.
Of course.
That was bringing you everywhere with me, so appreciate that. Okay, Garth went a little bit into it, and I'm going to try to be as precise, be as concise as I can be when I speak about our process, how we formulate the player, okay, the moments that we're trying to create for the players, and just kind of our overall strategy and our belief, our ethos about how we want to, one, ultimately develop a good human, a good person, but also an elite player, an elite talent that can then hopefully contribute to being a part of our Sounders first team and maybe beyond in the future. Before I do that, as I'm going to tell you a story, I want to keep this slide here, okay? These three things, these ideas, these concepts, this is something we try to live by very purely every single day, okay? If I can start with the story, it starts with a young kid from Nevada, okay, Las Vegas specifically. His name's Danny Leyva. All right, Danny Leyva came to us at a very, very young age. Danny Leyva embodies a lot of what we believe in. Danny Leyva is the player we want to see and produce. Danny Leyva is also the person that we want to see and produce, okay? Danny's somebody that, if we look at these three parts of it, he embodies, he encompasses everything, okay? The first time we saw Danny, he's very young, 13 years old. That's when the tracking, that's when the scouting started, okay? So at that time, I was fortunate to hold the role. I was the head of recruitment for the academy, okay? Seeing Danny play for the first couple times, you could see there was something there, okay? You couldn't quite pinpoint it, but you could definitely tell there's something more than what we're seeing here. There's more potential in him, the glass isn't full, and there's a lot more he has within him, okay? As that journey of scouting began, okay, remember, it's not just a snapshot, we make a decision on a player, okay? So as we continued to follow Danny, as we continued to recruit Danny, we went to Las Vegas, okay? We ended up running club sessions for his team in Las Vegas. At the time, he played for, I believe it was Barcelona LV, so offshoot, use the name, use the jersey, whatever that might be. That club turned into Heat FC, but that's a different thing. So the first time we go there, I mean, it's 105 degrees, it's the middle of summer, we get to the fields, his team started training, I think, around 6:30, 6:30 is approaching, 6:29, we're bringing the players in. We're fortunate enough that they'd let us enjoy and work with their players in their environment. Where's Danny? We're looking around. Okay, well, Danny's not here yet. That's strange. Okay, here comes Danny. He's running over, okay, over to the field. It's like, okay, no problem. Maybe he was a little bit late, whatever that might be. Okay, I'm asking their coach at the time, did he just come from something? He looks already drenched in sweat. He's like, oh, Danny works with the younger kids in the club. So he's a U5, U6, U7 coach at that time. He's 13. Okay, so right away there's a level of maturity that we're seeing and an ability and a want and a need to pass down that game to a younger generation of players. So that was the first thing we noticed about Danny. Okay, it's only getting hotter, by the way. Now it's 6:35. I think the temperature rose by 5 degrees. So, it's getting there. Training session goes by. Obviously, he's the best player in the training session. A couple other players good too, but he was different. Okay, session ends 8 o'clock. 20 more degrees hotter. I don't know what was happening. It was a weird vortex. But 8 o'clock ends. We're looking around, addressing the group. Where's Danny? Okay, I don't see Danny again. He's gone. Okay, there he is in the background. Now he's helping load up the fundraising tent into the truck after the training session. Okay, so right away we could see character. Right away we could see humility. Okay, right away we could see he's wanting to give back to his community. And when we look at these things, okay, when we talk about financial assets, okay, the one thing is a homegrown player for the Seattle Sounders, from a financial perspective, okay, does not exactly count against your salary cap. So the more homegrowns you have, the more ability you have to then bring in maybe a higher caliber player, a more expensive player that hits your salary cap. So the more we can produce our own, the more we can produce our own players, the more of those moments that Peter talked about, Garth talked about, the more of those moments can happen, because now we can measure ourselves with the world's elite because we're able to hold ourselves to a level where we're producing our own, okay? And instead of maybe going after the next player, spending money for him, the cost of retaining your own talent within your club is just as important. So the retention of talent is critical, not just the selling of talent, but if we can retain that talent, Danny Leyva, Josh Atencio, whatever it is for the next 10 years, you don't have to spend X amount of dollars on a transfer fee. again, the academy has helped support the first team, and that's ultimately the goal of what we do. All right, moving right along. It's not Las Vegas anymore. It's not too hot. These are the people that support our players. Okay, so this staff, this group, they give a lot. They sacrifice, they spend time, they invest. You know, I don't like using the word sacrifice too much. I think it has a bad connotation, but they invest in the players, for the players. You know, and so when we see moments like this, when we can see this young kid coming out of Vegas at 13, joining our homestay program, progressing through our academy into Tacoma Defiance, into the first team, these are the people that surround them. These are the people that help support them. And these are the people that I have to give thanks to. I have to give everything I have to, because they're the ones that create the moments for the players. And sometimes it goes a little bit unseen. Again, and that's why we choose to work in the development side, because what we do won't be seen for years to come. And that's what we want, because we want the lasting impact to have these players into our first team, reflected on the field, and entertaining the people that are there in the field, in the stadium on that day. So it's important to us that I think we acknowledge everybody here, okay? These are the ones that are making these players, turning them from young, vulnerable, innocent, talented, potentially good players into the players that we're seeing step onto a field when João Paulo gets hurt, going into a game and helping us win the first Champions League.
Henry, can I interject?
Absolutely.
So I'm Peter. You guys just heard me ramble. Peter's back. But my association with Seattle Sounders started in 2015 as a father of an academy kid, as a product of what Henry's just talking about. So I can actually attest to what he's talking about, the support. And probably, what's the number, 90%? More, probably higher. Don't make it.
Higher.
Don't make it. Like my son didn't make it to the first team, right? But he did end up going playing in college. And almost all these kids get an opportunity to play in college. And my son played, luckily he got to go play at Stanford. He got a scholarship to play soccer at Stanford. And he's the youngest of 5, had the lowest test scores and the lowest activities of all my children. They're all angry because everyone got rejected from Stanford except for him because he could kick a soccer ball. So I said, well, maybe that's what you should be spending more of your time doing. But no, but I'm here to say this is real. This isn't just like Henry making up words. This is what we do, and the development that these kids go through set them up so well for so much more. And yes, we would love them all,
Of course.
to be on the first team. That's just not the reality, right? So, but I just wanted to say that before I.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Henry.
No,
for
thank
what
you.
do. So it's actually a moment, an impactful thing that we do for these kids.
Thank you. All right, moving along. So keep Danny in the back of your head, okay? He's the one. It's very difficult to connect the dots moving forward, okay? So the first time Danny came in, you know, we have to remind the players, you have to look forward, you can't look side to side. And like I said, connecting the dots, you can't do it going forward, but you can do it moving backwards. So every time a player gets into the first team, every time a young player from the academy gets through our development system, makes their pro debut, that's a good moment for us, because now we can connect the dots going backwards. Now, they're not finished, obviously. They're going to play for the next 10 years. They're going to have success, but that's one of those moments that we can look and see, okay, this happened, we did this, we trained them this way, we looked at the physical development, we looked at their emotional development, we looked at their psychological development that Garth alluded to, okay, and we're able to connect the dots moving backwards. And we're a little bit still young in our project, okay, it's still in those embryonic stages, but you know, we're getting to a point now where our youngest homegrown players are approaching 20 years old, leaving their teenage years, and now ready to have that impact that you've heard a lot of the people within the front office, Garth, everybody talking about moving into next year, moving into the year after that. Okay, so we're getting to a point where now connecting these dots is critical, and every one of these dots, every one of these moments helps us reevaluate, strengthen, and do a better job moving forward. It starts with the environment. So if we look at the environment that we are working within, okay, so we have to look at population density. We have to look at where, you know, the greater population mass is distributed, okay? So if we look at those red dots, population map, okay, this is where a lot of our players from Washington are coming from, okay? There's obviously the eastern part of the state, different parts. We have players from Moses Lake, Ray Serrano, players from Spokane, but these areas here, this is our guide. Okay, so players under the age of 20 that are playing the sport, this is the environmental scan that our scouts will look through to look for players. Now, obviously, there's people they work with, coaches they work with, clubs they come from, but this is kind of the starting spot within that scouting process, okay, finding what the demographics look like, what the distribution looks like, okay, obviously in this graph here, 2 or more races, okay, so we have a very diverse population of players playing the game and a very diverse group of inhabitants that are within this Washington area. And then outside of that, we'll look at the top players outside of our region, okay, so our Danny Leyvas, okay, obviously Obed from Alaska, okay, because the reality is, the more we can be precise with this, the less likelihood that Obed's playing against us or Danny Leyva's playing against us, and that's critical because there is an elite population of players that do not live within the access of an MLS club, therefore can't access an MLS academy. So we have to then go after those players to bring them into our environment, to strengthen our environment itself, but also to give opportunity to players from another community to come into our community and hopefully make a difference and make it through the pathway. From that point, okay, these key qualities, okay, we try to use this as a guide. When they're first coming in, 12, 13, 14 years old in our SDP program, training with us twice a week, these are kind of the things that we're looking for. They won't have all these competencies, but they'll have some of them, okay? Obviously the perception part, massive. The resiliency, massive. Moving at 13 to another state to live with a homestay family, there's a massive amount of, perseverance and an honor that you can bring to your family by going through that process. Okay, obviously having the cohesion that we asked for, putting the group ahead of the individual. Okay, it's never about the individual, it's about the collective. Okay, the adaptability, the growth mindset we see. Okay, being able to adapt in their evolving roles, technique, physical, all these things. Okay, these are things that we look for at 12, 13. Now, once we get them into the program, once we start to formulate these players, from this part of it, they have these competencies, they're starting to develop, they're starting to figure out who they are as players. We start to then look at the biological factors, okay? So this can get a little bit pedantic, so I'm sorry, but this is a critical part of what we look at, okay? Growth and maturity. This player all the way over here, I don't know if anybody in the front row can see it. That's Ethan.
It's the hair.
It's the hair, yes, the hair did it. Ethan is what they call a late developer, okay? His maturity offset was very low. He's also a November birthday, so that's also something that plays into it. But he's a player where a lot of times these players might get overlooked, okay? And if we go back to that last slide about what we value the most, the perception, the understanding of the game, these are the players that we have to invest the most in, okay? They do studies all the time about what the birth year offset is for players in any given age group. And usually you're gonna find players at a lot of teams, clubs, even still in the MLS Academy system, it's heavy quartile 1. That means January, February, or March, these players are born. So obviously they're going to be a little bit stronger, a little bit faster, a little bit more prepared for the challenges in that moment. Now, when we look at biological factors and we look at players like Ethan, we know that they're going to be able to succeed and we know that they're going to be able to develop and have the same strengths that they don't have now, but they'll have them at a later stage in life. And that's more critical to us than the player that is maybe overdeveloped at the time or that is having success because of their size and speed. The other good thing is, Ethan in this scenario, these late developer players that are born maybe 4th quartile of the year, they're developing coping mechanisms that are going to help them in the future game. Okay, so even when they're playing in their own age group, they're still playing up, if that makes sense. So eventually when it becomes all bets are off the table, they're past their U22 year, okay, now they have everything they had to develop as being a smaller little late developer player, and now they're in the body of a man, they're in the body of a player that's a proper athlete, but they have every coping mechanism they developed because they had to go through that struggle. So that resiliency part of the key qualities that we just looked at, this is a very good example of that. That's Ethan there, that's Danny Leyva there, that's Alfonso Ocampo Chavez, that's at the FIFA U17 World Cup. Okay, so when you're patient with players and you can help them along, even if you know they're not going to have success yet, even if you know physically they're not quite there, you know that the mind, the perception, that part of it will come later. So we make sure that we can help develop the players regardless of size. Moving along. Okay, this is going into now the game model. This is very in-depth. This is very specific. I'll go to this next one. This one paints a clearer picture. Our head of methodology, Michael Morris, does an incredible job of organizing everybody's thoughts and organizing how we want to develop the players and train the players. We basically split the game into 3 phases, okay? Possession to advance, unbalancing, and finishing. Within those 3 phases of play, we have principles of play. So if we're talking about the unbalancing phase, so the phase where we're trying to get in behind the back 4, okay? I think we've all heard the term changing the point of attack, switching the point of attack. That falls into unbalancing phase. Now, all these principles I just went through, these are all the principles of play that the players will learn, okay? So if we're in the unbalancing phase, you know, changing the point of attack, creating a 2v1, creating overloads, this is kind of the curriculum that we use to then instill the values in the players. And what this is our principles of play that we develop within the development system. That is the guide to their decision making. Okay, so the principles they learn, okay, the curriculum they go through, that helps guide the decision within the field and in the game. So when they step onto a first team field, and again, these are club aligned principles. Okay, so what they're saying, what they're teaching, what they're asking of from Brian Schmetzer will also be taught and developed at a younger age, so that when they get to that point, the language isn't different. We're speaking the same language within the club, and that only helps those players like a Danny, like an Obed, like an Atencio, like a Reed. It helps them better adapt when they're forced into an environment that is zero compassion and about the result. Until that point, we have the luxury of patience, we have the luxury of time, but we know when the player is good enough, that player will become old enough, regardless of they're 16, they're 19, they're 22. If they're good enough, they're old enough. That's the reality, and that's what we believe. So moving along again. Again, weekly training structure, head of methodology, Michael, gets our groups together, gets us to work as a group, gets us to evaluate, but this is kind of how we then train those principles of play. So throughout the week, this is kind of the lead into a game. Identity exercises, isolated functional defending, possessional positions, creation, identity games, but then these are critical here. So Brandon Moran, okay, our head of developmental performance, he's the one that's then helping those players to gain the right physical capacity that they're going to need to play at a higher level, especially in a professional game. So this is kind of how the structure of the week looks. These are critical sessions. That's our conditioning phase. This is our strengthening phase. Brandon does a fantastic job of helping them grow into the players that they need to grow into so that they can compete in Lumen Field on a Sunday night, Wednesday night, and help contribute to victories and help contribute to 3 points. Again, going a little bit more into the behavior, this one is a little bit wordy, but this is kind of what our coaches are asked to do, creating types of training sessions that bring out the right behaviors into players and instill the right values into them based on our game model and principles of play. You know, we look at, if we go all the way back to Danny, you know, we talk about positional profiles. I'm sure some of you have heard of this before, but positional profiles are what the player is in their formulation that are going to allow them to succeed on the field. So very specific positions demand very specific traits and competencies, okay? A center midfielder, somebody that's playing as an 8, potentially it's Christian, potentially it's Obed, Danny, Josh, a number of these players. Okay, there's very specific things that they need to be able to do from a technical, tactical perspective, and then there's also very specific things that they need to do in terms of their physical perspective. So if you watch a game and you see those little things that the players wear, they have a little GPS unit on the back. Okay, that GPS unit tracks total distance covered in the game for 90 minutes. Okay, so an elite player playing as a number 8 for the Seattle Sounders, we know that they need to cover roughly 12.5 in terms of meters covered in a game. We know that HID, that's high speed running. So every time you see Christian sprint for 60 yards, 900 of those meters, he's doing that within a game, okay? Distance, 2,700, sprints, 50, repetitive. So the ability to maximize output, these are critical dimensions that it required for this player to have success and play in that position for the Seattle Sounders, if that makes sense. So based on their physical competency, based on their power output, based on the physical things that we're trying to develop, we can use this as a guide. If that's the target, if that's the benchmark where Christian is, okay, that's where we're able to then develop the player into getting those core competencies from the physical side, as well as the technical, the tactical, and learning everything that comes within the game. Pathway Okay, I just want to cover this real quick. This is kind of what it looks like for our youngest players that sign. Okay, they have their transition year. Adrian talked a little bit about MLS NP, that's Next Pro, MLS Next Pro. That's the league we now play in for our reserve team, Tacoma Defiance. Okay, and so this is kind of like a pathway that we would like to chart for the players going through and coming through our system. This is the minutes we want to try to give them. These are the experiences we want to expose them to. Okay, so by the second year, we're looking at 1,600 minutes. Accumulated by that third year, looking at 34, all the way up until hopefully they get to this stage where they're representing the national team at a U17 World Cup or a U20 World Cup. Or this is that Austin game about a year ago where we started quite a bit of young players in that game and were able to get the result because of everything that came before. Again, when we're working with the development side, where we're working on player formulation and player development, you won't see the result far down the road. But every step and every dot within that connection, it's critical. And we have to ensure that we hit every part of it. Okay? Otherwise, we won't have moments like this, or we won't have the opportunity to send our players to an international tournament where they're going to be tested against the world's elite. This moment here helps us benchmark where we are as a club in terms of our development space. That moment when they play against Holland, Ghana, and Germany, now we see what their number 8 can do. Now we see what their number 6 can do. Now we see, are we on par with the world's elite, or are we a little bit behind? And that also helps us guide and evolve and allows us to have those moments where we can be accountable for ourselves, but also show the humility we need, because then the next generation is coming through and we have to help them be a little bit better than that last generation that came. This is how we track it. I mean, again, this is Obed. These are all his games in Tacoma Defiance. Again, we're using this guide here, and we're tracking where Obed is and how far away he might be. So is he covering the ground that we need him to? Is he getting to the points where he's showing that he's close enough to Christian to be able to compete physically with him? And this is kind of how we guide ourselves and use this to get to the points we want. These are all just physical data numbers. Okay, this is a Tacoma Defiance game. It's the same printout that we get from a first team game. Okay, so first team game, again, Christian maybe didn't quite hit the benchmark. Okay, 11,253. Okay, Albert, 11,022 meters covered. All these things are the printout we get after the game. And then what we're able to do is then use that to evaluate against Tacoma Defiance. Okay, so here's our Tacoma who's getting close to that? Okay, Soda Kitahara, you just saw that announcement. Okay, he's at 11,415. These are just the averages. Over the course of a year, it becomes very clear where they're at. But on a game-by-game basis, this is kind of how we track their development physically. But more importantly, obviously, the game and their understanding and their perception, that comes first. But there is a physical level and there is a physical competency that the players have to reach. And this helps us guide it and helps us get the players to the level they need to get to. Last thing I'll go through, the moments we like to create. Okay, Garth talked about it a little bit. These are moments that these players go through, the injuries, the constraints that we put on them. Okay, the first time we won a GA Cup, second time we won a GA Cup. Okay, sending 3 players to a U17 World Cup, having a massive density of developmental players in one game, being able to get a result away at Austin. This is where the club is headed. And the more of these players we can produce, the more success we can have. Because the more homegrowns on that roster, the more money there is on the cap to spend in different areas. And again, it's not just about selling players, okay? It's about retaining talents. If Danny Leyva can finish his career in Seattle and be the captain for the next 10 years and then come back into the academy and start coaching, hopefully, for us, that's success, okay? But that's Danny's journey. And when we get to that point, like I said before, we can connect the dots moving backwards, but we can't connect the dots moving forwards. But as long as we have these benchmarking moments, it helps us evolve, it helps us adapt, and it helps our entire development staff be a better version, a more humble version of themselves every single day.